Welcome to the May 2020 Central Oregon Writers Guild virtual presentation. I hope you are safe and well and using this time productively. I'm Mike Cooper. I'm the president of Central Oregon Writers Guild. I teach writing at Central Oregon Community College, OSU Cascades, and with my wife Irene through Blank Pages writing workshops. Today we're going to talk about beginnings, middles, and endings. No matter what your purpose in writing, whether it's to inform, educate, entertain, question, or share your insights into life, the universe, and everything, the most important thing that you can do as a writer is to keep the reader's interest. You won't accomplish your purpose if the reader puts down your book or story. We're going to take a look at ways to hold your reader's interest. These are some of the ways. These are not all of the ways. These are some ways that I've found that work for me. But there are many, many options out there in the world. I'm going to start at the beginning. We'll start with beginnings. We'll talk a little bit about story structure. By the way, everything that I talk about here is applicable to fiction and nonfiction and possibly prose poetry, but again, you'd have to check in with Irene to make sure that all works. First slide here. The snow in the mountains was melting, and Bunny had been dead for several weeks before we came to understand the gravity of our situation. This is the opening line from The Secret History by Donna Tartt. Opening lines should have some sense of voice and point of view. If they can infer some plot and some character, that's great. And in the opening paragraph, at least, if not in the opening line, you want to give the reader some idea of setting and conflict. Let the conflict in as soon as possible. And the conflict can be as simple as wanting to be alive. We look back at this sentence, we see that the setting is the snow in the mountains. We're in the mountains, the snow is melting. That's springtime. Bunny, who may be an animal, a person, whatever, had been dead for several weeks. So we've been obviously living with that. There's a reason that Bunny had been dead for several weeks and we haven't done anything about it before we came to understand the gravity of our situation. This is a hint at conflict here. We also get a perspective point of view. The term we, the words we and our are being used here, which is a second person first person plural, but more than likely this is a person who's part of a group. We want to take a look at the psychic distance that our narrator has in the beginning. So if we start with it's August 4th, 1977, and it's snowing, we know what the day is. Those of us who are alive at that time may think back to where they were when this is happening. We also understand that snowing on August 4th is not necessarily a normal thing if we're in a temperate zone, but we have this picture of snow. Here we have a large man walking out of a restaurant into the snowy night. Now we have a human involved here, we have a restaurant, and we have the snowy night. We have this vague image here. Now we have Joe Worthington steps out of the Sunset Bar and Grill and shivers. We have Joe Worthington, an individual who steps out of the Sunset Bar and Grill, an actual restaurant that we're picturing, and shivers. And he may be shivering for a number of reasons. Joe Worthington, stepping out of the Sunset Bar and Grill, thinks about how horribly cold it is. Now we have this sort of outside view of Joe's thoughts. We have a third person view, and we see that Joe Worthington is thinking. Here, damn, it's cold, Joe Worthington thinks, stepping out of the Sunset Bar and Grill. Now we're inside Joe's head. We also have moved into a present tense, which makes things more immediate. And then we can trim that down even more into damn, it's cold, which brings us right into that moment. As you can see, that psychic distance gets closer and closer as we go down the list. Some more opening lines here. And title is an important aspect too. Title gives us some perspective. Title's almost a sneak peek, right? As it would be a prologue or an introduction or something like that. if you see the title "Another Roadside Attraction," you might be up for this opening line. The magician's underwear has just been found in a cardboard suitcase floating in a stagnant pond on the outskirts of Miami. We have an idea of what we're about to get into here. Sylvia Plath, The Bell Jar. A queer, sultry summer. It was a queer, sultry summer, the summer they electrocuted the Rosenbergs, and I didn't know what I was doing in New York. So we have this perspective of time, the summer they electrocuted the Rosenbergs. They may or may not be important to this story. We have this discussion of this queer, sultry summer. We're not really sure what that means, but we do know that our main character doesn't know what they're doing in New York. Flannery O'Connor's good man is hard to find. The grandmother didn't want to go to Florida. So we know we're not in Florida, and since we're referring to the grandmother, we're seeing the grandmother as a part of a family structure. There are other people, the mom, the dad, the so on and so forth, right? Didn't want to go to Florida, and we have an idea of conflict already. Grandma doesn't want to go to Florida. One of my favorites, if you really want to hear about it, the first thing you'll probably want to know is where I was born and what my lousy childhood was like and how my parents were occupied and all before they had me and all that David Copperfield kind of crap. But I don't feel like going into it if you want to know the truth. Real good sense of character here. Also, Salinger has given us backstory without giving us backstory. In fact, he says, I'm not going to give you backstory, but here it is anyway. Anna Karenina, obviously we're going to hear or read a book about a woman named Anna Karenina, but we're going to start with all happy families are alike. Each unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. All happy families are alike is boring. Each unhappy family is unhappy in its own way is interesting. So we are going to probably hear about unhappy families in this piece. George Orwell, 1984. This book is titled 1984, and it was written in 1949, so it's obviously a futuristic book. It was a bright, cold day in April. Okay, we have those. And suddenly now the clocks are striking 13. That's different. Something is different. So we're starting in this first sentence telling us that this is a different world. We'll do a writing exercise. And I've got these set up so that where the red pause word is, if you want to stop and do the exercise or invite friends over that you're happy to share air with, you can do it as a fun little writing workshop. But so you can hit pause when we get to those red pause things and do the exercises. This is the alphabet exercise. It's a setting exercise. Write the letters of the alphabet down the side of a page. Think of a particular setting that you're familiar with and fill in words for as many letters as you can. Doubling or tripling up is fine. So I'm sitting in sort of my makeshift office here. I have a picture of loaves of bread on the wall behind me with this Portuguese saying, and I could put that under B for bread or P for Portuguese bread. I have a plate on the wall that my daughter made at the ceramics place for me that has some shoes on it, so I can put that under S for shoe plate or P for plate with shoes. I have some peacock feathers here and a little stuffed peacock, so I'm filling in the P's really well. If you overload on one letter and don't find a Q or a Z, that's fine. You can look at somewhere as small as your office, your bathroom, your kitchen. You can look at a town. You can look at Ireland. You can look at a cabin in the woods or something like that. So I'll let you work on that, and we'll go to the next part. Next part is free write for 5 minutes, and here's the prompt. Your character is arriving at the place that you've chosen to do something that they don't want to do. So we have this setting that you made, and now your character is showing up there. So just free write that for 5 minutes. And the next part is to try 5 different opening lines for that. So write 5 different sentences, first opening sentences, and have them be different. And think back to those things that we talked about earlier: voice, point of view, plot, character, conflict, and setting. I'll let you work on that. Now we'll look at structure. If you've ever had a workshop with me, you know that I almost always bring out Freytag's pyramid to talk about. This is a linear story structure. It's chronological. It's cause and effect. You do not have to write this way. but this is how things happen in the world through time. You don't have to start at the beginning and end at the end, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. The exposition is the status quo prior to anything happening, and that status quo may be total happiness with birds singing and the sun shining and flowers blooming, or that status quo could be a soldier in a trench in World War II or World War I, whichever one, wherever they want to be. The status quo is the status quo where they are at the beginning of the story, and that gives us our orientation. The inciting incident is the thing that happens that makes our character have to do something after which they will never be the same again. The conflict, the crisis, and it gives them their motive to do the thing that they're going to do, which moves them into the rising action, this struggle, the escalation. We'll talk about stakes in a little bit, but the rising action, the stakes have to increase. We have to know that this matters. If you're writing a story about a person whose boss is coming over for dinner, and this person has chosen to make their mother's famous jasmine rice because the boss will be so impressed that they'll give them a raise and love them forever and life will be good, and they go to the store and there's no rice. If the person says, oh well, I'll make some potatoes, then the stakes weren't very high. If instead this person drives all over town looking for rice and all the stores are out of rice and they begin knocking on random people's houses looking for rice, then we're raising the stakes. Climax is where the character engages in the confrontation with the solution to that inciting incident, right? It's where they make their discovery, their decision, their change. This is we'll talk a little bit more about this in the next slide here. Falling action is where they resolve their conflict. The resolution is the change that has been made, who they have become. And then the denouement is the new status quo. So basically you're looking at a person is one way, something happens, they do something about it, and now they're a different way. The Aristotelian 3-act structure. Act 1 is the setup, hook, the compelling event that gets the reader involved. The backstory is our exposition, our status quo, lays the groundwork. Inciting incident, again, event that propels the protagonist into the crisis. 2, Act 2, confrontation, the crisis itself, the emotional crisis that's based on the incident's effect on protagonist's character flaw. And this is important, this is the story part of it, the emotional crisis that happens here. The struggle, the protagonist struggles against ever-increasing obstacles, whether they be physical or emotional, but they have to go back to the inciting incident, the thing that the character wants. The epiphany, the protagonist realizes their flaw and overcomes it, unless it's a tragedy. Act 3 is the resolution. Protagonist does something that couldn't be done before. They make a plan. The climax, the protagonist confronts the antagonist, and in the ending, the story is resolved and the reader has catharsis. Again, this stuff doesn't have to happen in this order. You can start a story at the inciting incident, you can start it at the climax, you can start it at the very end and say, this happened to me 2 years ago. You can start it really just about anywhere, but these parts have to be in there. You can't show a change in a character unless you show how they were before, if that makes sense. All right, beginnings, suggestions for beginnings. To begin in medias res, in the middle of things. One of the things that we see the most in editorial work that we do is that people write really, really long backstories before they get into the action of the story. I think that is a wonderful, wonderful thing to do. It's really important for a writer to understand exactly what's going on. It's good for you to have written those 5 pages. Now go back and take out those 5 pages, what you need to get the story going, and figure out where you can insert that information throughout the story. Avoid front-loading the backstory. Define the stakes. Again, we have to know how important this is, this challenge that our protagonist is facing. And again, people relate to people. We're in this because we're We want to have an emotional interaction. We want to have emotional growth. We want to see how others are emotionally growing. We don't want to read about a historical event unless, of course, it has people in it. How people manage, that's what interests us. This is the Gary Provost dramatic sentence. This is a great little template to use for your writing. And again, this is laid out in chronological order. It doesn't have to happen this way. Once upon a time, something happened to someone, and they decided that they would pursue a goal. So they devised a plan of action, and even though there were forces trying to stop them, they moved forward because there was a lot at stake. And just as things seemed as bad as they could get, they learned an important lesson, and when offered the prize they had sought so strenuously, they had to decide whether or not to take it. And in making that decision, they satisfied a need that had been created by something in their past. This brings up that concept of want versus need. The character knows what they want. The character doesn't always know what they need. Harry Potter knows that he wants Voldemort dead, and that he wants his parents back, and that he wants the evil wizards to be gone. He doesn't know, maybe at the beginning, that he needs to address his abandonment issues, to find love, to find friendship, to be part of a group. He pushes his friends away throughout the course of the stories, and we keep saying, no Harry, you need those friends, and we keep proving that over and over again, and that's really what ultimately we discover, and he discovers too. So back to the Gary Provost dramatic sentence. Pursue a goal is the want. The character decided that they would pursue a goal. The second part, they make a decision that satisfied a need that had been created by something in their past. Here's an exercise. This is from Pixar. This is a little format from Pixar, and this is kind of fun and easy to do. You can do this with the story that you started writing about with your alphabet exercise, or you can take existing work and plug this in here and see what you've got. Again, this is chronological, doesn't have to be this way. Once upon a time there was blank. Every day, blank. One day, blank. Because of that, blank. Because of that, blank. Until finally, blank, and ever since then, blank. Once upon a time there was gives us our setting and our character. Every day is our status quo. One day is our inciting incident. Because of that is our rising action. Until finally is our climax, and ever since then is our falling action and new status quo. And I'll let you work on that if you want to. Now we move on to middles. Middles are tough. A lot of times we get great beginnings and great endings, and we want to just draw a straight line to them. And it's important to increase the stakes, to increase the value of the emotional suffering, to make it more impactful as we go along. It makes our ending that much more worthwhile. So continue to raise the stakes. How do you do that? Sometimes, like I said, we just sort of see this direct line to our ending. Experiment, take risks, try and fail, try different things, roll the dice, look up prompts online, look up what's the worst thing that could happen, what's the thing that absolutely couldn't happen. Play around with that stuff. If you end up crumpling up a lot of paper and throwing it in your trash can or your virtual trash can if you type on a computer, it's not that big of a problem because you may find some really cool stuff. Seeing your character suffer and finding meaning therein, that's what we're after. The more they suffer, the more the meaning. Here's an exercise. 30-year-old employee falls in love with their boss. The boss is single. The boss is secretly in love with somebody else. Your job, write down 5 plausible options for what happens next. They don't have to be all that plausible either. They could involve the two of them. They could involve another person. They could involve a bizarre situation, bag of money, a parrot, whatever you come up with there. So be creative in this, and I'll give you a few minutes to look over that. Endings. Catharsis, we mentioned this earlier, an experience of emotional release and purification, often inspired by or through art. And remember, your writing is art. In psychoanalysis, catharsis is the release of tension and anxiety that results from bringing repressed feelings and memories into consciousness. We want our reader to feel this, even if our character doesn't. Catharsis is problem solution, it's completion, and it's okay if the reader is a little unhinged and not fully complete at the end, but don't leave them without the tools to make their own decisions. It's kind of up to you. Think of the books and the stories that you love and how they make you feel, and look and see what types of endings you like. As I mentioned earlier, that James Joyce ending is that literary ending where maybe I didn't mention it earlier, where he's out looking at the falling snow, and we get to kind of decide what happens from that point. Or you might have an ending that just clears everything up. Your call. Here are 5 different types of endings. The protagonist gets what they want. That's the happy ending. The protagonist doesn't get what they want, or they lose something that they already had. Unhappy ending. The protagonist gets what they want but loses something more valuable. This is the classic tragedy. They get the gold, lose the love. This is that King Midas story. The protagonist sacrifices the object of their desire for a greater good, or the ending is ambiguous or bittersweet, mostly for literary fiction. Again, that ending of James Joyce's The Dead is a good example of that. Exercise, and you can use this again on work that you're working on right now, or if you want to continue on with that alphabet exercise story, list several possible things that could happen in your ending. You could use this with the boss one too, even if they violate your original vision of the story. Come at it from every possible angle, the expected and the unexpected, the soft and the hard, the happy and the sad, whatever lies in between. You should have a list of at least 5 or 6 possible endings, and be creative again with these. Nothing's off the board. Again, if you're writing at home, I have a little quote taped to my computer screen here that says, "Write as though nobody's watching, because nobody's watching." Now, pick your favorite one, and try ending with these 5 different choices. Do 5 different versions of this. End with a line of description, end with a line of dialogue, end with the character's action, end with an internal monologue, the character's thought or feeling, and end with a metaphor. And I'll let you work on those. And this is something that I came across a few years ago. And this is sometimes implied, but it's good to be conscious of it. The consequences of the ending. Explore the protagonist's grief, sorrow, regret, or remorse for what they've lost once they have transformed. Remember, we're going from one status quo to another. And as I said earlier, the character is transitioning into someone new. They will never be the same again, right? So they will have lost something. The loss of their previous self, the loss of their innocence, the idea that they can never go back to the person that they were. This adds an extra beat after the ending. The Stephen King book, The Body, was made into the film Stand By Me. And the final line of that movie, again, plug your ears if you don't want a spoiler alert. Final line of that movie is, "I never had any friends later on like the ones I had when I was 12." It's a movie about three or four boys that go out to find this body. They experience life. They have this coming of age thing. This is an important part in their life, and they've grown past it. And there's this loss of this innocence, this 12-year-oldness that we all once had. Another great example of this is the story A&P by John Updike. Young man works in a grocery store and stands up for some young women who the manager, whose name is Lengel, is scolding for coming in their swimsuits. The young man has such strong conviction that he quits his job as a heroic gesture. "I look around for my girls, but they're gone, of course. There wasn't anybody but some young maid screaming with her children about some candy they didn't get by the door of a powder blue Falcon station wagon. Looking back in the big windows, over the bags of peat moss and aluminum lawn furniture stacked on the pavement, I could see Lengel in my place in the slot, checking the sheep through. His face was dark gray and his back stiff, as if he'd just had an injection of iron, and my stomach kind of fell as I felt how hard the world was going to be to me hereafter. Another great piece of advice that I can't tell you where I got, but go back and add something beautiful. When you're done with your story, whether it's a comedy, tragedy, whatever it is, go back through it and make sure that you've added a little piece of beauty in it. And I think you know what I mean here. Homework. Find some of your favorite beginnings and endings, examine them, and discover what makes them work. You have, you probably, I certainly do. I write because I like writing and because I've got a lot of benefit in my life from reading other people's writing. And I have favorite authors and I love what they do. And go back and find those authors and find the beginnings of those books and the endings of those books or stories or memoirs or whatever it is that you like, and see what they're doing. Actually take it apart and examine them. Look at them in that sense of voice, point of view, plot, character, conflict, setting that we talked about earlier. Look at the examples of how they've done their endings based on what we've looked at there before. This is one of the best ways to further your craft. And that is it. Thank you. Come visit us at centraloregonwritersguild.com. We have events listed, not as many as we did before, but there are some virtual events going on there. We're doing monthly meetings still. We'll do them virtual as long as we need to. Hoping to have a live workshop in June. But check those out. The landing page of our website on the right side lists events coming up. And if you have any questions at all, email us at centraloregonwritersguild@gmail.com. And that is it. Thanks.